As the weapon clears the holster,
Police firearms training is a unique blend of art and science. The art is the ability of the instructor to provide an effective learning atmosphere while conducting training that is both viable and pertinent to the officer.
Good cover, Baker! Good cover! Good cover!
And science is inherent in the physical skill development and mental conditioning aspects of the training courses. Firearms training is a critical task that must be undertaken in a serious professional manner because nothing less than human lives are at stake. But police firearms training has undergone so many changes through the years that many are confused about which styles, techniques, and methodologies best accomplish that critical purpose. Welcome to the second part of our Police Pistolcraft series, Untangling the Snakes. The source for this series is the textbook Police Pistolcraft, the reality-based new paradigm of police firearms training. The author of the book is Mike Conti, former director of the Massachusetts State Police Firearms Training Unit and founder and director of the Sabre Group, which offers law enforcement training and consulting services. Conti will serve as the subject matter expert throughout this series. After watching this video, you will be able to describe what police officers actually do with their pistols, describe the primary training elements and psychological conditioning methodologies present in police firearms training, and how we have been preparing officers to use their pistols, and describe the principles of stress inoculation and how to employ it properly to produce beneficial results. Be sure to read the printed courseware that accompanies this video for more training information.
You have the power of life and death. If you're going to take your gun out and make it go bang, it's because of only one reason. Either you or someone else's life is in danger.
As a police officer, you use your pistol to assist you in controlling out-of-control behavior, and deadly force is the ultimate in control. The idea is based on Sir Robert Peel's 9 principles of policing, which state that physical force will only be used to the extent necessary to restore order, only when the exercise of persuasion, advice, and warning is insufficient, and then only the minimum degree of physical force that is necessary to achieve the police objective. That hasn't changed since the Baltimore Police Department became the first to arm its officers with the 1849 Colt pocket revolver in 1857. But it wasn't until 1895 that the New York City Police Department became the first to institute firearms training for its officers under then-Commissioner Teddy Roosevelt.
All he had them do was they fired some familiarization rounds, very few rounds. They did a lot of dry firing. He had them work with the guns a little bit, but they did next to nothing with the guns.
It was a modest beginning, but it was a beginning, even though handgun training was slow to catch on with other departments across the country. Thankfully, that has changed, but one thing that hasn't changed through the years is the circumstances surrounding police gunfights.
But Overholzer was dead, killed in the shootout one investigator compared to the OK Corral.
85% of the time, the suspect and the officer are within 7 yards of each other. 53% of the gunfights start with the suspect 5 feet or closer to the officer when the lead starts to fly. It will most likely take place at night or in a low-light environment. The vast majority of cases will be spontaneous, with the suspect making the first move.
Walk up, make contact with the driver. I said, "Sir, I need you to step out of the car over here next to the curb. I need to talk to you about something." And really not a whole bunch of words out of him. He said, "All right, you know." So I start, as he's starting to get out of the car, I take a couple steps backwards, and he steps out of the car, and whenever he turns around to face me to walk back over to the curb, hear a loud boom, see a flash right in front of me.
He was already making his movement, so I needed to react, and there was no time to think, and I mean, I was thinking, and I just did what I did. It wasn't something that I had practiced. I just did it because I felt that's what I had to do in order to stay alive.
For decades and decades, people recognized that the training was not preparing the people for the field. They knew this. Most of the shooting was taking, the shooting encounters were taking place very close. People have always known this, has been recorded all through the centuries, and through the 19th and the 20th century. And they knew this, yet still the emphasis in training was on target shooting from greater distances than the actual encounters occurred.
Mike Conti says standing at a line at some distance and firing shots into paper targets prepares you for standing in line at some distance and firing shots into paper targets. It is necessary for demonstrating proficiency in the handling and firing of the weapon, and it proves that the officer can hit what he or she is shooting at under controlled conditions. But the officer will have little or no control over the conditions out in the field.
But what the police were actually doing in the field, they were not shooting at targets. They were shooting at other people when they had to. So it was a whole different approach, a whole different discipline. And again, we went off that track and we began to focus on training. Training became an activity unto itself. We began to train our police officers to succeed in training, not in the field. So that's where this thing kind of went off track. Pointing a gun is not an instinct. Pointing your finger is not an instinct. It's a learned skill.
The firearm has gone through several evolutions since the American Revolution some 240 years ago. Throughout the Revolutionary War and up to the mid to late 1800s, the long gun or rifle was the dominant weapon of both choice and necessity. The flintlock pistol had come along, and while its small size made it convenient to carry, it was still a weapon of last resort, just ahead of the edged weapon. That was true initially for the percussion revolver as well. Then came the Civil War, and the horse-mounted guerrilla irregulars such as the Union's Jayhawkers and the Confederate Bushwhackers. The fast, close-quarter style of mounted combat they developed made the pistol an ideal weapon.
And these people who came out of that war learned how to fight with handguns, because now they had repeating handguns. So they could fire them quickly, they could fire more rounds, and they got very, very accurate and effective with the handguns.
Many of these gunmen moved west after the Civil War, and some of them gravitated into law enforcement. The dime novels of the day played up the exploits of these men with their lightning-fast draw and deadly accuracy, and the mythology of the American pistolero was born. The one constant up to this point in history was the total lack of firearms training. If you used a firearm, it was assumed you knew how, and no training was needed. Even when Teddy Roosevelt instituted firearms training for the New York City Police Department in 1895, few, if any, departments followed suit for decades.
When my father got on Everett Police Department over, oh my God, it was 50 years ago, at least 50 years ago, okay? He got on Everett Police Department, little city outside of Boston, north of Boston. He was issued the uniform, badge, gave him the gun in the holster and said, go get him, kid. That was all the training he got, okay? Very, very little training, if any, had been done traditionally in this country for decades. At the time when guns were first issued, they were just issued, same kind of thing, go get them, kid. Okay? And we think that that's outrageous now, but this was just happening a few decades ago.
What firearms training was developed along the lines of the military model.
They basically focused on the type of activities the military's focused on then, and to a great degree still focus on. They're trying to evaluate proficiency. Can you load the gun? Can you unload the gun? Can you handle it safely? Can you hit a target from different distances?
That was adequate for the Western Front, but really didn't meet the needs of civilian law enforcement. In the 1920s and 30s, 2 British police officers with the Shanghai Municipal Police Department studied the shootings the police there were involved in. The now legendary William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes took what they learned and changed the face of handgun training.
For over 13,000 years, human beings have been fighting each other with sharp, pointy sticks, okay? And basically, when you have a small, sharp, pointy stick in your hand, you want to stick it in to the threat. So that's another thing we tend to do. Now, you take the sharp, pointy stick and you make it a handgun filled with sharp, pointy bullets. And now, a human being on the threat again wants to stick it into the threat. So they saw this. They saw them crouch, saw the both eyes open, saw the focus on the threat, saw the one-hand hold, and that's how they trained them. They built a system to train them to perform efficiently and effectively based on how they would instinctively respond to a threat.
Classes are limited to less than a dozen men, thus ensuring the utmost security and providing almost individual instruction for each student. From the moment of their induction, the identities of the recruits remain a carefully guarded secret, which explains the use of masks in this film. From whence they came, or for what perilous mission they're being prepared, is the concern of nobody at camp.
This is a top-secret video the Office of Strategic Services had produced for Congress by Director John Ford during World War II. Fairbairn had been recruited by the military to teach the brand of close-quarter pistol fighting he and Sykes had developed for the Shanghai police.
During his instruction period, the student is taught an entirely new system of pistol technique, especially adapted for fast offensive action. The actual offensive firing stance is assumed in this manner. Left foot forward, both knees bent, with the weight always forward on the toes. Keep elbow and wrist locked, pistol parallel with the ground, and as close to the center of the body as possible. Left arm is raised to preserve better balance. The pistol is held tightly, as if it weighed 40 or 50 pounds. Grip it until it trembles. In close gunplay, it'll be trembling anyway. Kick the door down. When you do, get him. That's right. Look out for this flooring. It's bad. Don't fall now.
Fairbairn had developed a mystery shoot system in Shanghai, which the military now adapted as a house of horrors.
They would take their people through this environment. The instructor would be behind them, him or her, and they would guide them from behind. Go over here, go up there, go down there. And whatever the person saw, they would have to respond to. They had role players inside there, and they used a combination of live fire and blanks, the way the course was set up. So they weren't actually firing at the role players, okay? Unless they had a constant stream of Germans coming in from the war, they would have run out of people very quickly. So, but they had their own troops dress up as Germans and talk German. What they did was they conditioned their students, they conditioned them to respond appropriately to various stimuli, whether it was a threat or no threat. They conditioned them. They're not just shooting targets and trying to get the holes in paper. They're learning how and when to use the guns, deadly force, which is the key to the whole thing. The first time they do that, have to make that decision, should not be for real.
Mike Conti says this is where handgun training took another turn, and not for the better.
They had reached basically a pinnacle. There's only so many ways to do things. House of Horrors and the point shooting, they developed a system for close quarter combat and psychological conditioning that was very efficient, very effective. The FBI took this and they morphed it into their own program. Eventually, the point shooting system evolved into something different. It became more stylized. They still were doing the crouch, but then they started to hold the arm out here, and the gun went to more like a 3/4 hip position. They started to destabilize the technique. Now it took more time to learn and to get and stay proficient with. Okay, they took it down here instead of keeping it locked up, which gave you stability from the body point to locked up straight here. So they started to destabilize this.
The reality-based scenarios found in the House of Horrors program gradually evolved into Hogan's Alley and various other types of shoot houses, where the realistic threat-type targets were replaced with inert paper, plastic, or metal targets. Where once the highly stylized NRA bullseye hand-on-hip dueling type stance was favored, different stances were developed, from the FBI crouch to the isosceles and weaver stances.
In this position, he presents a smaller target for return fire. His head and shoulders are back for better balance and vision.
But the weaver pushing, pulling, of course, and bringing the gun up to eye level, keeping the eye up, head up, not ducking behind the weapon, etc.
Different instructors began to teach different things, the high ready versus the low ready, and the importance of the sights in all shooting situations.
The question here often is, do I use the sights? The answer is, yes, you do. You don't have to have a perfect sight alignment and sight picture, but see that front sight on your assailant's chest.
Eventually, different shooting competitions evolved, with the main emphasis, once again, shooting targets in a controlled environment.
What the activity that they were focused on succeeding at and excelling at was hitting targets. Metal, paper, plastic, didn't matter. They were targets, non-threatening targets.
Keep them muzzles pointed down at the targets, not over that berm.
Again, it all comes down to conditioning. You've got to know what you're doing with this stuff, because we can cause more harm than good if we're wrong.
Police firearms training has gone through many fits and starts through the years, but the primary elements in the vast majority of programs are physical skills development, marksmanship training, and mental conditioning.
You lock that slide to the rear. Watch that muzzle. You need to move anything when you're locking that slide to the rear. You move your body, got it?
Physical skills development emphasizes the skills needed to safely and effectively employ the handgun, and involves everything that the officer will need to do with the weapon in the field.
You're going to locate, you're going to open your magazine pouch, you're going to index, pull it out, you're going to drop the magazine, and ready to go. And then the same thing, when you fire rounds, and you're going to locate your belt buckle, you're going to slide over to your second magazine pouch, you're going to index it, all in one motion.
Outstanding there, Croto. Any questions for Croto?
Ready? Up!
Please don't move! Every time I say up, you bring the weapon up, hit the silhouette, make it go bang one time. If it doesn't go bang, you fix it till it does. Make ready? Up! Good.
Examples include presentation, reload, stoppage clearing, speed shooting, moving target drills, and recovery to the holster.
You all know how to do it? Get on down to the prone position. Go ahead.
The primary purpose of marksmanship training is to enable the student to be able to safely deliver an acceptable number of accurately placed rounds into a specified area of the target from various distances and positions. This training activity is primarily conducted on a square range under stringently controlled conditions. Historically, if at the conclusion of the marksmanship test the student has punched the appropriate number of holes in the stationary target, he is deemed qualified with the weapon. Once qualified, he is then allowed to carry and employ the firearm while operating as a police officer in the real round world, where control is often a subjective and fluidly changing issue.
You
You have received a call to check on the welfare of a baby that a man is carrying in an alleyway. It was reported that the man has dropped the baby numerous times.
Sir, stop!
Mental conditioning training is critical to ensuring the student is truly prepared to employ the handgun under real-world conditions in a law enforcement capacity. That includes the development of a winning mindset, true confidence in their physical and mental abilities, sound judgment, and the ability to cope with the mental and physical toll of a lethal force encounter. While often cited as being the most critical element of police firearms training, mental conditioning is actually often given only secondary consideration. That is because historically, the focus has overwhelmingly been placed on the marksmanship qualification aspects of training. In addition, many of the powerful psychological conditioning methodologies inherent in police firearms training are too often misunderstood or misapplied by well-meaning instructors.
Whatever stimulus is presented to that officer, he then responds how he's trained, and the reward is he hits the target, good job, passes the qualification course, he wins. If it's a pop-up type target, he hits it and it falls over, that's the reward, good job, passes the course.
The psychological conditioning methodologies inherent in police firearms training include stress inoculation training, classical or Pavlovian conditioning, and operant or Skinnerian conditioning. We'll examine the importance of classical conditioning and stress inoculation training in more detail in Part 3 of this series. A more thorough explanation of each is included in the printed courseware and the text Police Pistolcraft. Operant conditioning illustrates the importance of having a thorough knowledge of the science side of police pistolcraft. The principles of operant conditioning were first illustrated by the experiments of B.F. Skinner in the 1930s. He demonstrated that he could condition a living organism to perform in a certain way when given a signal or stimulus by rewarding it for the performance.
He would have a cage, the Skinner box. He would have a pigeon or a rat in the cage. He had a light, he had a feed chute, and he had a little lever in the cage. After a while, and it got more involved than I'm about to tell you, but this is the basic scenario. After a while, what would happen is he would condition the animal so that every time that the light came on, and only when the light came on, the animal would hit the lever and a piece of food would come down the chute. That's all it was. The light is the stimulus, the conditioned response is the hitting of the lever, and the reward is the piece of food. Stimulus, response, reward.
On the range, it works the same way. The stimulus is the target, the response is to shoot, and in this case, a light signaling a hit is the reward. Operant conditioning works in all types of firearms training.
When you're working on a FATS type machine, you've got different scenarios unfolding in front of you. The stimulus is the man with the gun right here presenting a threat, your conditioned response, maybe to challenge, maybe to shoot, whatever it is. And the reward is you stop the threat, hit the threat. That's all operant conditioning based activities.
Stimulus, response, reward. Operant conditioning works well in all types of training, but if it is employed incorrectly, its application may be hazardous to the health of the police officer. Case in point, teaching the student to draw and fire on a threat stimulus target.
Typical draw and fire drill. Now he's firing on a threat stimulus target as opposed to the no threat stimulus target. We have mental conditioning aspects involved now. So a typical drill would look like this. Make ready, up. Look at what we have specifically just conditioned this person to do. We've just conditioned our officer to draw and fire against a drawn gun. Now, I don't care how fast you are in the draw, unless you get a lot of luck with you or the shooter on the other side gets distracted. There are not many people in the world who can outdraw a trigger press. Someone has the finger on the trigger, even on the frame, 1/10 to 3/10 of a second to make it go bang. On a fast, good day, maybe if you're lightning fast, maybe a second. Say you can even get up to a second, bang! You're still way behind the power curve. Officers have been killed in the line of duty trying to outdraw a trigger squeeze. New paradigm. Threat target. Condition response. Observe the threat. move to cover while accessing weapon, and engage from behind cover. Non-traditional range commands are used, and the shooter is in a non-traditional range position facing uprange with his weapon holstered. That guy has a gun!
Police, drop the gun!
Good job. Verbal commands we used, good movement to cover, and firing from behind cover. Recover. The stimulus is someone pointing a gun. What do we want to condition our officers to do? So this is what we've done. We use this model and we build our programs according to it now. So if someone has a gun pointed at you, we want our officers to move as quickly as they can to cover while accessing their own gun. So that's how we train them. They see the stimulus, they move to cover, draw the weapon, and engage from behind cover. That's what we want them to do. So again, it all comes down to conditioning. You've got to know what you're doing with this stuff because we can cause more harm than good if we're wrong.
The same can be said for stress inoculation training. Having someone point a gun at you will generate stress. The key to viable training is to try to replicate that specific stress.
We know that in the real world, they're going to be operating under stress. We know that. But we also know that the targets that they're shooting at do not induce or create any type of stress on the shooter. Yeah, you want to hit the target, but as far as, any kind of fear or anything coming from them, no fear comes from the target to you. So we want to induce this type of effects of stress that we know our people are going to experience. So what do? Well, we have them do push-ups. We have them run back here, run up here, do some push-ups, do some jumping jacks, get going. Now the whole idea here is we want to induce some of the physiological effects. They're breathing a little harder, they get a little bit cranked up, maybe some adrenaline gets pumped. But if you really look at this, this is a total different type of stress. Okay? This is from physical exertion. Yeah, they could chase somebody. That's a possibility, but we're not trying to do that. We're trying to get them cranked up psychologically.
There is also another kind of stress associated with just being on the range.
There's already a lot of stress there if you look at it. You've got people on either side of you. You want to do good with the guns. You don't want anybody to make fun of you. You don't want to perform poorly in front of your peers. With something so strongly identified with being a police officer, the handgun, and your handgun skills. So there's already a little bit of stress there. And now, a lot of cases, what the instructors would do is they would induce additional stress by yelling at the people or cranking them up.
Overbearing instructors on the line and physical exertion induce stress, but not from where it will come in the real world.
One of your officers has gone on to investigate a problem in this building, bad part of town. There's been problems here before. The last transmission they have from your officer is a garbled cry for help. That's what they think it sounded like. Haven't been able to raise him or her ever since. You're the first one here. Because of the situation, you're not going to wait for backup. Your nearest backup is about 20 minutes away. You might have an officer in trouble down here, bleeding out, whatever. You've got to get in, clear this place, and find the officer and help him or her.
Welcome back to the House of Horrors.
Police, follow! Good job. Any threats? Any threats? Good job, okay.
Police bomb! Put the knife down! Put the knife down!
Good job.
There's some tension when you're going through it.
Oh, sure. Now, I went through with you at the same time, right? I was right with you?
Yeah.
How come I'm not breathing like that?
Because you know what's coming.
I know what's here. Exactly right answer. It's the unknown.
Yeah.
Okay, we're not running, we're not jumping. It's just the unknown, and you get that stress. So we know you got good stress dump, and you handled it beautifully. You did great.
It was good. It was a lot of realistic scenarios when you're going in. You're not sure what you're going to see.
In the third and final installment of this series, we will examine how the new Paradigm Police Firearms Training Program addresses this critical aspect of mental conditioning and how we can better program our officers to survive and win real-world violent encounters. The basic text for this series is the book Police Pistolcraft, the reality-based new paradigm of police firearms training, available from Calibre Press.